Yes, thank you so much, everybody from all over. And those who are in India, good evening. Those who are in the Western Hemisphere, good morning, good afternoon. And of course, people on the Far East, a little good late evening. And it's nice to be gathering on this virtual platform this, evening. You know, as we have seen, COVID-19 has spurred the disruption and disarray across the globe, and it has turned the whole world upside down. Never before this has happened. Now, it is one thing for a nature or uh, so-called, act of God to do world upside down. And the other way of looking at it is that while this has brought, pandemic, and we are really sorry for those who are trapped in the pandemic and those who are suffering from there. And it's very sad, sad situation. I think our hearts go out for them, and whatever we can do, we'd always be happy to do that. Now, while the nature has turned the world upside down, I think there are times where we should voluntarily also turn the world upside down. If we don't do that, somebody else will do it. And in the process, we thought that it would be useful to revisit the way in which we are governing ourselves, not only on a national basis, but on a global basis. And at some point in time, uh, my personal feel and some of the people on the platform, I think, or most of them, that, the entire theory of state will also give way to, the global, one world kind of situation. And in the process, we have to now rethink about how we govern the countries, how we manage ourselves and stuff like that. The First, there are two parts to today's talk. One, because of COVID, for most parliaments are not able to meet. So how do they make decisions, and what decisions they make, how long this is going to go on, nobody knows. And so can we use technology to take parliament in the cloud, and how can we do that? That's one part of the talk. And second is, should we be revisiting the entire concept of democracy, the way in which it's been functioning? Studies have shown that majority of the people are not happy with the way in which democracies are being managed today. There is a lot more scope. It's not that they do not want democracy, but I think they would like to have a much better improvement in the whole system. And there are a number of ideas, number of thoughts that are being worked upon for quite some time. And we thought it will be useful to have discussion, not only from a philosophical perspective, but also from the practical perspective. How can technology help to improve the democratic setup? And those are the two things we are looking at. So one, on the parliament in the cloud, and number two, the democracy. Now let us look at what is the role of a parliament. Parliament, uh, you know Parliament's main role is to legislate. Now, today, what is happening is that, we have a representative parliament. And as you have seen in my note, which I have circulated already, that original concept of democracy started in circa some 500 BC when Socrates, and of course, before that also happened, but formal, understanding is that whole thought process started sometime in 500 BC, and then Plato and then Aristotle came, and then we had Athenian style direct democracy in circa 2000 AD. 2000 years ago. And then it was sometime in 930, a country called Iceland had a first parliament. So according to whatever records I read about, it was 930 where representative democracy began, because Athenian style democracy made it difficult for people to come all the time and to work on that. And, it has its own pluses and minuses, but I think that is what happened. And representative democracy started 930. It's now about 1100 years, and the question is that we have learned a lot of lessons all these years. And can we now develop a new business model for rethinking the way in which the democracy works. And as I was mentioning, the primary job of Parliament is to enact legislation. Executive administers that, and judiciary, interprets and give justice to the people. So there are three different arms. That is a typical democratic framework. And so, if you look at the function of Parliament to enact legislation, what we feel is that, in fact, today, that you can now have at least technologies available that will allow you to vote through remote devices, whether it's phone or otherwise, in a safe and secured way as well. I think those are the things we have to be careful. Somebody's putting gun on your head, somebody is putting pressure, otherwise that is not a true vote. So one thing is that technology now has come where at least we are somewhere at the place where within 1 minute billion people can vote, and within 2 minutes you can know the results. So it is possible to use technology to vote and discern people's vision, all that kind of stuff. Now, uh, so now with this all technology is coming up. Second thing that is coming up is that as a function of legislation. Now, if you see any law, uh, typically there are three parts to every legislation. First part is definition, clause or section. So all the definitions are provided in that. Second part of a law is operational part. And third part is that if you do not, comply with the operational side, then there are penalties and prosecutions. There are three parts to most of the laws, and that's how the laws are structured. Now, as far as the definitions are concerned, how do you go about it in a e-world? So when we look at today, everything is about crowdsourcing. So even legislations can be crowdsourced, and we can learn some lessons from Wikipedia, which is actually defining the words and the meanings. At one point of time, eh, we used to look at dictionaries and encyclopedias and other materials, which are compiled by a few people, and then everybody in that. Now, 100 and some 40,000 people, they edit Wikipedia, and people are not looking at encyclopedias or dictionary. They first go to Wikipedia. Maybe it is not 100% accurate, or there may be its own defects to the whole thing, but people have begun to trust Wikipedia a lot more than ever before. So you can crowdsource the you know, meanings of the word, and so far it is a general meaning in the dictionaries and or the Wikipedia, but the legal meanings also can be crowdsourced. So one third of the job is actually already done. On the other hand, we have to now work on drafting the operational part and the penalties and prosecution. Okay. Now, therefore, today it is also possible to crowdsource that part of the law. So it is something extraordinarily new. Two other things I have recently encountered, and there is now even the fictions are written by artificial intelligence. And I believe a book called A Road has come out, and it is written by artificial intelligence. I see many articles. I was at World Economic Forum in Davos, and a lot more activities from AI happening. So AI will begin to lot more things. In fact, artwork, the painting, and many other things are now coming up onto the artificial intelligence platform. In fact, I also received a mail just yesterday from one of the top lawyers in Los Angeles, a media lawyer, and he said next, now entire film is also being produced by artificial intelligence. So AI is going to play an important role. Also, big data will play an important role, because data itself will figure out what is important to the people and what people really want. Today, members of parliament, okay, they are elected by the people, but once they are elected, then they have got this 5 years mandate, and uh, you know They can basically go and vote whatever they want to. But now, and sometimes they do not know what actually people want. Okay, it's like, when you think of customer, many times you're a seller and you want to sell something, you think customer needs this, but actually customer may need something else, and you're giving him something else. So that's one way of looking at it. So with big data and information that is available, automatically the important issues can be flagged out. They can be turned into draft legislation. They could be introduced in the parliament, uh, depending on number of petitions and other kind of stuff that may go on. So there is a whole way of doing introduction of the legislation in the parliament, and those kind of things that we can be working on. So whole thing can work on the in the cloud. So today, willy-nilly, whether we like it or not, parliaments are not meeting because what is called social distancing is not making it possible to get together. So how long? 2 months have gone by, for example, in India with this lockdown, and how long it will go. So like that in many other countries. So if we cannot meet, where do you meet? You meet in this cloud in the sky somewhere. And so we are looking at, can we not have parliament in the cloud? I think, and imagine the amount of cost saving that would happen as a result of doing parliament, in the cloud, because you can sit anywhere in India, anywhere in the world. You can still be in the meeting place. I think last week, Raj, who is here, he's a vice chancellor of Jindal University. He convened a meeting. We had about 3,000 registrations and 2,000 people came on, on web platform, and people could interact. And same way, all these educational events we are doing, 500,000, all those kind of people are coming out. So to have 500-600 members of parliament to meet in the cloud, and everybody gets individual attention, and what we also find that there'll be little more discipline as well in terms of time, in terms of you know behavior, in terms of many other things in the virtual world. So I think we are entering a new world altogether. So willy-nilly, whether we like it or not, we'll have to do something about convening the parliament in the cloud. So that was my first part. And number two, we talked about direct democracy. We talked about representative democracy. Now, direct democracy has its own pitfalls, and representative democracy has its own pitfall. Is there something in between? And there are a number of models that are looked at, but one of the popular one that is coming up now, and it's in the early stage, is a liquid democracy. So wherein the citizens can empower or can directly vote if they want to on any issue. They can appoint a representative. They can appoint more than one representative if somebody thinks that, okay, team is a great name on venture capital and what should be the regulation. He knows as a business person. He can appoint him as a representative. If there's a tax issue, then I am in Smith maybe working on that. There are people on the blockchain or otherwise, whatever is the requirement. I think accordingly the representation can be provided, and so those people will handle it. And whenever you think that they are not doing a good job, they can withdraw the representation. So citizens have more rights, and personal sovereignty may take, front seat as well in many cases. But those are kind of situations we have to look at. And there are a number of, you know, advantages of that system. Um, because if you look at what in liquid democracy, what happens is that, first of all, it's a trust base. So so long as you trust in the representative you have, you can continue with that. Number two, it is um, more about uh, competition and cooperation than just competitive environment. And today, whole politics has become everywhere very acrimonious and stressful. So even for members of parliament, it's not always a fun. There are too many issues and pulls and pushes and stuff like that. So here, the entire politics moves to what is called um, issue-based politics, and there would be less expense on the elections. There'll be, more cooperative environment, and there are many other advantages. We can talk more about it as we go along. But this is a new development that perhaps, which is recent, new in the sense it's not just yesterday. It has been happening for last some years, but it is worthwhile at least looking at over a period of next, 10, 15, 20 years, whether it can transition um, slowly, gradually, or even at a speed at which we can deploy technology, because technology will make it possible. So, that would be one of the things that we would like to look at. And I only take one example of Amazon. If somebody asked 15, 20 years ago that you can have a whole shopping mall in the sky, I think we would not believe it. Even when in early 2000 Amazon began to come in, people were still skeptical, is it real, unreal, and all that kind of thing. Although the valuations were going berserk, because those who had a vision, those who understand, um, you know, they valued it very high. And today, I think what we are seeing is that it is a reality. And uh, it's all happening in the sky, and unfortunately, Barnes and Nobles and other big stores have really gone in oblivion. So, so there are a number of things that one can talk about, but, you know, so there are a number of concepts that are coming up. As I mentioned, liquid democracy is one model where citizens are technologically enabled. Let me just repeat some of the concepts so that you have better understanding. So liquid democracy technologically enables citizens to vote directly on policy issue, delegate their votes to one or multiple policy areas to delegate their choosing, and delegates vote to one or more people delegated to them as a weighted voter, or get rid of their votes delegation whenever they please. So there is complete power with the individual citizen. It is based on the issue-based politics, as I mentioned earlier, rather than party-based. Liquid democracy fosters cooperation. Here, there is no race to become representative. Instead, delegates merely compete in the basis of winning voters' trust continuously. So that's one thing. As I mentioned, the digital democracy is the use of technology in political and government processes, and it incorporates 21st century information and communication technology to promote democracy. And such technologies include civic technology and government technology. It's also a form of government in which all adult citizens are eligible to participate equally in the proposal, development, and creation of laws. Then third thing, which again I mentioned, I'm just repeating some of those things, what is called wiki democracy, okay? And one proposed form of e-democracy is wiki democracy, with government legislature whose codex of laws is editable wiki, like Wikipedia, as I mentioned, crowdsourcing. In 2011, some people in Finland undertook experiment in wiki democracy by creating a shadow government program on the internet, essentially a compilation of political views and aspirations of various groups in Finland on a wiki. So they could find out, importance, as I mentioned earlier, and preferences of the legislation and where it should go and stuff like that. Of course, direct democracy, we have talked a lot about it in the past, and which is the citizens are directly involved in decision making of the state. Voters express their opinions by continuously voting on issues. But direct democracy, while it offers full control, accountability, and equality, sadly, the direct democracies do not scale, mainly because of the rational ignorance and, due to ever increasing list of issues, and they cannot cope up with all those things and attention. So again, it has its own pitfalls. It becomes impractical for voters to be informed about all issues, as they either do not have the time or the desire or the expertise. And that's the downside to direct democracy. And then, of course, representative democracy, we've been living with that. It's most widely used form of democracy. It involves handling or one's right to representatives who act on behalf of somebody else. And representatives are willing to serve and represent communities' interests in the parliament. But some of the problems that happened with representative democracy are, citizens are limited to vote representatives or restricted, candidates who often do not share one's ideological views or interests. So sometimes it happens, it does not. Representatives are also only loosely held accountable for their actions during the term in the office. And they make a lot of promises, but not necessarily they are required to fulfill those promises. Of course, they can get ousted in the election. That's a different thing. And representative democracies can also lead to corruption due to concentration of power and people working towards their own self-interest, etc., etc. So it is not that everyone, but at least today it is largely felt that this has become very big issue. And and finally, of course, we talked about liquid democracy, which is delegation of a sign of a trust, and that is a model in between representative democracy and the direct democracy. And as I mentioned earlier, the it has some advantages of that. There is low entry barrier. The minimum requirement that is required is somebody's trust. You win. Liquid democracy is also about cooperation and more about cooperation than competition. And it also creates different degree of responsibility. Then if the trust is broken, water is able to take control once again. Um, and also, liquid democracy leads to better decisions. It eventually evolves into meritocracy, where the most skilled, knowledgeable, and experienced people would become actual representatives. Okay, so these are a few thoughts, and I thought it would be useful to have this as a background. And I'm so happy that we are all thinking about it. It's all about conceptual. I think we all have to go together. We have to work together, take everybody along, and figure out what is the next uh, stage of development we want to see in the way in which we are governing ourselves. And in fact, this afternoon we had a dialogue with Professor Muhammad Yunus, who is Nobel laureate, and he has always taught me one thing. He's been my friend, that you create the world that you want. And now, what is the next kind of world we want after this COVID and after all the experiences that we have gained over a period of 1100 years? I think, what do we want? And can we improve learning lessons using technology? I think we can be much more efficient and effective in doing a lot more things together. So with these words, I will now, tell Raj to take over the reins. And Raj, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nishith, for giving a comprehensive tour de force on the, in many ways, setting the stage for the Technology and Democracy series that has begun. Nishith Desai Associates has taken upon itself in really creating a discourse surrounding the theme Parliament in the Cloud, Reinventing Democracy, a lively debate on the future of the Parliament itself. In fact, 3 weeks ago, on 22nd April, the United Kingdom broke a 700-year-old tradition, and UK had its Zoom Parliament. And from Brazil to Canada and to the European Union, there have been different forms of virtual engagement with regard to the functioning of legislature and other such institutions are already happening. A relatively conservative court resistant to change, such as the US Supreme Court, also had video conference enabled discussions. The Indian Supreme Court has begun to do the same thing. So in some ways, the theme of this discussion today, as much as it might be quite radical and transformative at some level, is not something that cannot be foreseen for the future. Although COVID-19 has posed a new opportunity and indeed a challenge for people to meet together. And that's why this is being, there is an opportune time for this discussion. I also want to say that, taking upon what Nishith said, there have been numerous surveys around the world, including the Pew Research Survey, which has on many occasions talked about the higher levels of dissatisfaction prevailing among people around the world, particularly in liberal democracies, about the state of democracy, about the trust between the citizen and the state has been steadily declining. That doesn't mean that people have lost faith in the institutions of government, or for that matter, democracy as a framework of government, but clearly there is high levels of dissatisfaction. And one of the ways by which this could be addressed is possibly to see how citizens could have a greater say in the decision-making process, not just when elections happen, but also continuously participating in the various decisions that are taken by the legislature, by the parliament, and other such institutions. So this discussion, this debate about the future of the parliament, I believe, is going to be a lively and interesting one. And the fantastic bringing together of individuals who have thought about these issues, who had a significant experience thinking and reflecting about these issues, and also having an audience who can participate in this discussion will be indeed valuable. Some people who are going to be speaking for the rest of the days are already with us today. So what I hope to do is I will request all of you who are present here to, for a few minutes, introduce, just 2 minutes, introduce what you're going to speak. But we will come back to Tim Draper, who will give a longer presentation for today. So I will request Tim to hold on, and I'll ask Mr. Alexander Bard, Swedish philosopher, author, lecturer, artist, songwriter, and music producer, to briefly introduce what he's likely to speak. And then we'll go around, and then finally we'll come to Tim Draper, who can in turn make a presentation. So can I now request Mr. Luis Cuende, Executive Aragon Association, to briefly introduce what he's likely to speak.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks everyone for having me here, and Tim for recommending it. So basically, I'm going to speak about digital courts. So basically, ways to resolve disputes online. Once you have a digital court, you can build a digital jurisdiction. And that is what's very interesting to me, is that with the internet, we can iterate on jurisdictions. We can iterate on nation states the same way that we can iterate on software. And so if you look at the past wealth creation over the past decades, it has been primarily because of software and technology. And so if we can bring the same kind of approach to iteration to nation states, to jurisdictions, then I think we are onto something. And so the idea, what we're doing is we're creating this suite for basically open borderless collaboration for people to organize over the internet and build their communities and build their organizations over the internet. And then this dispute resolution system that sits beneath it and enables people to resolve disputes, which usually are resolved in traditional courts, where you have to literally just go to the court and improve your points. You can actually do the same thing, but on the internet, using a series of incentives and economic incentives that we created. And so that is the idea. That is what I'm going to talk about. And I will talk about how it works a little bit more, and then also have a call to action, so people who are interested in reshaping the future of law can actually join that decentralized court, because you can basically join with any computer. And so that is the idea. I think that is the future of law. And I think we can build better jurisdictions and better nation states using software.
So Luis, you'll be speaking on Wednesday, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Luis. Can I now call Mr. Scott Smith, thought leader and author of the Financial Freedom Act, to briefly introduce what he's going to speak.
I'm focused on looking at our financial systems as an operating system, and what sort of changes can we make to the tax system and to the benefit system and to the banking system that would materially improve the well-being of the citizens in a nation. So I try to look at it from a very non-partisan point of view, like you're a cold and calculating engineer who was running an optimization program to optimize the financial well-being of the citizens within a sovereignty. And a lot of that is focused on the US system, but it's certainly adoptable in most of the major nations. Some of it would be adoptable throughout the nations. I do think that the issues, this ties into the democracy, and I'm very fascinated in looking at the government also as just another operating system. And so what you're trying to do is optimize that operating system. Again, it would be for the well-being of the citizens. So if we always look at it as an optimization program, I think we can sort of clear the air of a lot of the political hubris that's out there that, really slows growth.
Thank you very much, Scott. That sounds fascinating. No problem. Great.
But I can tell you what Unstoppable does.
Please.
Unstoppable has created in effect, a social network in the cloud that is decentralized. And so people can be, centralization of social networks has made it so that there's censorship. And Unstoppable has the ability to create free speech throughout the world, where sites cannot be taken down. And so that's what Brad is up to. He'd do a much better job of describing it, but that's basically where they're going. So you could buy Scott.crypto or Nishith.crypto, and you could put up whatever you wanted. You could be in China and say free Tibet. You could say, hey, I don't like my government in Syria. You can say anything, and it can not be taken down. And so it creates free speech.
Thank you so much.
Raj, should I just keep going?
We'll just quickly get Shekhar, Mr. Shekhar Kapur, to introduce what he's going to speak, and then we will come back to you. It'll take a minute. Mr. Shekhar Kapur, who of course doesn't need much of introduction in most parts of India, Oscar-nominated film director, free thinker, and visiting media tech teacher at MIT.
Hey, hi, thanks for having me. I'm just going to talk about why democracy has failed us. What is the problem? Why has democracy failed us? In a pre-COVID world, a COVID-19 world, post-COVID-19 world, what is democracy going to feel like? What is the parliament going to feel like? Because I do not believe that the post-COVID world is going to be a mirror or an adaptation of the pre-COVID-19 world. So are we even going to have boundaries? Are we even going to have democracy? Are we going to have a parliament? These are really important questions so that we can see and peek into the future. I'm also going to talk about technology and the parliament. Like theoretically, why can't AI take over the whole parliament? You feed your constitution into it, and then everybody just keeps on saying what they want. As Nishith just said, every citizen doesn't do it once every 5 years, but does it every moment, and the whole system keeps adapting and creating rules. Very interesting idea about technology, except that one of the things about AI, every time I look at AI, I kind of make a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And wisdom has a lot of things in it that AI at this moment cannot handle. Hope, fear. What happens if the country suddenly has to go to war? How does AI decide? Press a button? I don't know. Democracy, also the parliament, between the competitiveness between democracy and technology is that democracy has too much inertia in it. And technology will be constantly beating at the doors of democracy and the parliament system, because the world will be moving much faster than the parliament moves at this stage.
Thank you so much, Shekhar, for that fantastic introduction. I think the moral choices that instruments, including technology, ought to make will shape the future of how technology becomes a more legitimate framework for governance. And I'm sure those are issues that we're going to be discussing. Now I call upon Mr. Tim Draper, an iconic Silicon Valley venture capital investor, to begin his presentation. Tim, over to you.
Terrific. First, I really want to thank Luis and Scott and Brad for participating in this. You three are moving into a direction that I believe could bring this world to a utopian place. It's interesting. COVID-19 has brought all this to a head because we're looking at whether this world goes dystopian or utopian. But let me step back a bit. I think that I've had an opportunity to travel around the world, meet with the leaders of a lot of different countries, and something came to me, and that was that the leaders of the country are in competition with one another for the great minds and the capital and the businesses and the citizens of the world. And that kind of brought something to light. Now, the other thing that happened was I got a chance to be a part of that early internet world, and I realized that the internet was breaking down geographic borders. And so I started to put these things together, and I realized that governance can happen across border. And then I met with these guys in Estonia, who the president and prime minister of Estonia, who were creating the e-governance program. And it made me realize that this small country of 1.4 million people could now actually provide government services to people who weren't living there or weren't citizens or didn't even have anything to do with Estonia. And they said things like, just by having digital voting, all the young people started to vote, or just by having digital signatures, we saved 2% of our GDP. And then we did digital identity, and the crime rate went down, the business climate went up. And then they gave me a card, made me a virtual resident of Estonia. I was the third one. Now there are 100,000 of them. And I said, well, what do I get to do with this? And they said, well, you can open a bank account anywhere in the EU. You can start a business. You can do a number of different things as an Estonian virtual resident. And then I started to think, whoa, wow. So governments can compete virtually. We are going to leave the tribal world, the nation state world. We are going to be a global world, and these governments are going to have to compete for us. They're going to have to provide services, at least at the virtual level. There's still some things at the land-based level that are in question, but even security can be done with cameras. So much government is done now virtually. You've got, and so much of it is tied to insurance. There's healthcare insurance, and there's workman's compensation insurance, unemployment insurance, social security, welfare insurance. All of these things are insurance. Well, they can be provided remotely. They don't have to be provided by somebody who is in your physical space. And so these governments now are in a position where they've got to compete for us. Well, they're recognizing it. And some of the bigger governments are saying, wait a second, we like it tribal. We were winning that game. We own that space. And they don't want to change it. So they're putting up walls or trade wars or whatever it is, and cracking down on the use of Bitcoin and doing whatever it is, because they're saying, uh-oh, I see what's coming. And what's coming is a government can be set up on a boat 11 miles offshore. A government can be up in space. A government doesn't have to have a landmass, and it can provide services of any kind anywhere. And so I'm looking at this world saying, oh my gosh, governments are going to have to compete the way businesses compete, and the service we get is going to get better and better and better for the taxes we provide. So governments right now just take whatever taxes they feel like it, generally. And that's why all of you have talked about how people are unsatisfied with their democracy or their dictatorship or whatever. they're not satisfied with their government. Well, but we are satisfied with our food supplier until recently. We are happy with our, you know, our smartphone provider, the people who give us chairs and pens and paper and whatever else. And why is that? Well, they all have to compete, because if they aren't providing a good enough service for the cost that they charge, they are out of business. Well, governments have always had monopolies. They now no longer are monopolies. We can move. We can communicate like this anywhere in the world. We can move to another government. We can provide our services anywhere. And if one government says to Binance that if China says to Binance they cannot provide their Bitcoin trading system in China, then Binance moves to Singapore. If Singapore gets heavy-handed with their regulations, then they move to Malta, middle of nowhere in Europe. And so Malta says, oh, bring it on. We want your business. Bring it here. So I think that this competition is starting to happen. And if you provide a service that is a government-like service, then two things can happen. Governments will adopt it, and they will attract more citizens if they do. And the other thing is that new governments may be formed and provide better service because they now have these tools. So the tools, whether they be Bitcoin or the blockchain or smart contracts or artificial intelligence or surveillance or big data, all of those come together, and they can help us provide better governance to whatever people, wherever they may be. And governments, at least at this virtual level, are going to have to compete. So with that, it was pretty interesting to put a few of these things together. First, Luis, who has created Aragon, has created a service that provides a new form of dispute resolution, a new type of jury, a new type of law. And that can be provided throughout the world to all these various governments. And they can all adapt it. And if they don't adapt it, they will lose out to the people next door who are adapting it. And then Brad is providing this service that's going to give people free speech, no matter who they may be. That's going to permeate all governments. Governments are going to have to give up on trying to control the dialogue. I mean, they'll still try to do it, but they're going to have a more difficult time. And the service that's provided is going to have to be warranted for the price you pay, and the price you pay is in taxes. Scott has come up with this new system, and with dollars, it was a lot less practical. The idea of taxing transactions, but when you go into the crypto world, all of a sudden that becomes really interesting. You can actually have a government just tax transactions and not tax anything else. And then they could end up providing services to the people who are in their geographic region, but only get the taxes for the time that those people stayed in that geographic region. So if Nishith spent 90% of his time in India, he would give to the Indian government 90% of his transaction tax. If he was 10% in the US, 10% would go into the US tax base. That would encourage these people to all come, these governments to all attract people to their place. Now, AI was mentioned, and AI, as my son says, is going to take everybody's job. But what it really means is that AI is going to take all of the monotonous things that we do all day, and they're going to do those so that we can do more interesting things. Well, let's say AI does have a disruption, but I think this virus has had a much bigger disruption. We've got 36 million people unemployed in the US right now. So people argue for a universal basic income. Well, if you did a universal basic income in the US, you'd end up printing not just $9 trillion, you'd be printing tens or hundreds of trillions of dollars every day to get everyone out there. And then the dollar would continue on its path down. Well, Bitcoin goes up, but on its path down. What happens there is that universal basic income may not work there, but you could start a crypto universal basic income that that just started with a currency that was worthless to start with. Nobody would care. But they get it. And at some point, people might say, "Okay, well, I'll give you a cup of coffee for 100 of those, whatever they are." And then suddenly there's a value to that cryptocurrency. And then and so what we're in effect doing is printing vaporware that then starts building value, and then it could start growing, and then that universal basic income could be a thing, and it doesn't have to be diluting a political currency. So I think that there is a direction we can head where everyone ends up being alive. They end up having food, clothing, and shelter. Beyond that, maybe there's a transaction tax, and maybe we just have a completely free market around the world. You know that anytime there's tribalism, the markets are not, they are hindered. And when you have a trade war between two countries, both countries lose. It's just like any lawsuit. Both parties lose in a lawsuit. Both countries lose in a trade war, because any trade that was happening between them was making both countries wealthier. And if you cut that off, it no longer has an effect. And you've lost all that trade. So there is a major transformation that's in the process of happening right now. You're seeing the dictators rise and trying to keep it tribal, and you're seeing people stand up on their soapbox and trying to tell everybody to wear a mask and stay 6 feet away and don't do this and don't do that. And we're going to, put the homeless into the hotels, and we're going to do whatever. I don't know, in San Francisco, they're putting homeless into the hotels and giving them drugs and alcohol and cigarettes. And I'm kind of wondering what the incentive is to be a hardworking, tax-paying citizen if they're going to do all that for you if you're homeless. But it does create this this divergence of the people who seem to just be going along with wearing the masks and 6 feet away and whatever, even though if you look at the numbers, it is tragic that people have died of this COVID-19. But if you look at the numbers, it's not too different from a bad flu season. And they are, the dictating politicians are taking advantage of the crisis and standing up and rattling their sabers when we have an opportunity right now to do something really extraordinary and lead ourselves toward this global, open, transparent, decentralized world, while rather than allowing these dictators to to build up walls and stop the spread of good trade around the world. We want good trade around the world. We want a free market around the world. We want geographic borders to fall. We want customs offices to disappear. We want no trade barriers. We want a free world. And I think with these technology and these people, we can get that thing started. We can get a free world, an open world, a transparent world, a decentralized world to happen, and we'll all be better off. Imagine how peaceful, loving, and wealthy the world will be if we leave tribalism and we go to globalism, and governments are all providing services that are warranted based on the taxes they charge. So I leave it there with you. Nishith, thank you so much for putting this together. I think it's the beginning of a major global revolution, and I hope you, I hope this thing spreads like wildfire.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that wonderful, let's say, tour de force, which sets the stage for the rest of the discussions. There are questions coming in. Before I go into that question list, Tim, one of the things that that's being talked about by political scientists in different parts of the world is that the biggest fault line in many democracies is the lack of trust between the people and the government itself. Now, when you look at Nordic countries, for example, Scandinavia in particular, there is a high degree of trust between the people and also between the people and the government. And a lot of things have been attributed for this trust. So in some ways, what this crisis has actually created is, while we were having this conversation before this crisis, this has given new opportunities for governments to become stronger and asserting their power even more in an expansionary phase. So where we are now, it becomes even more difficult to have that conversation relating to that autonomy and independence that technology can provide. How do we deal with this? How do we get over it?
Yeah, I think governments have a very well. First of all, in those Nordic countries, the president walks amongst the people. They're very open. They get to know each other. They live under their own laws. In some country, in the U.S., for instance, our country, the government is separated. They're surrounded by bodyguards. They don't. Where we have Social Security, they have pensions. Where we send our children to their government schools, they send their children to private schools. There is a separation of the class of government versus government employees work shorter hours, longer vacations, bigger pensions, bigger healthcare program than the average taxpayer. There is a huge problem coming, and I think these dictatorships and these socialist governments, they build their power at their own peril. I think once they get to be a certain size, I mean, look, speech is getting to be free everywhere, and now we've got unstoppable domains. People aren't going to put up with it. At some point, there are going to be revolutions. You're seeing, our California governors stand up and say, we're going to put masks on everybody and do all this. And then you're seeing a few of the counties going, well, screw it, we're not going to do it. And then you see the feds having their day where they're saying, you got to do this, you got to do that. And you're seeing the whole state of Michigan coming right up against the Capitol building and saying, we're not going to do it. We want to keep working. We want our restaurants open. We want to travel. We want to stay in our hotels. I think what's the lucky part of this, even though you're seeing people sort of flex their muscles, is that they are in competition with other governments. If they're too much hanging on to their power, they're going to lose. They're going to get overthrown. It's a little like the old lion. The old lion gives a giant roar just before he dies. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, all those tribal governments, all those tribalists, the governments who are living off this tribalism, that are talking about their power and loving their power and power, that is the last great roar before we just mow them down with new technology and spread the good word around the world. I think that's where we are. I think trust is also value, which means that if a government is providing value, good value for the money they're taking, then they are much more trusted. You look through Sweden and Denmark and Norway, the roads are spotless and gorgeous. The bridges are shiny and fantastic. They have built beautiful infrastructure with the money. They keep it very open how they spend that money. The citizens like it. They're okay with it. I'm okay if I know where the money's going and I think it's a good place for it to go. I'm okay paying taxes. If I don't, then I start getting a little grumpy, and then I stop trusting them, and then I'm looking into what they're doing, and then I'm finding holes in what they're doing, and then you find things like corruption and whatever. And it's pretty clear that it's all coming to a head right now. This is an exciting time because it's all coming to a head. And I think we have a neat opportunity. And so thank you for all of your thought leadership, for all the technology that's coming out of Aragon and Unstoppable, and the thought leadership that Scott has provided, and Nishith. Sorry, I have trouble with that name. And Raj, I think it's great what you guys are doing. So keep up the good work. And I think the following is coming. I mean, people are saying, gee, you know, I'm not so sure the cure was better than the disease here. And they're saying, well, you know, wait, are we supposed to trust our government? They screwed up, and they're starting to look pretty silly. If you start analyzing the numbers, you're thinking, whoa, that was a huge mistake. Shut down 100 years of progress in 2 months. For what? For something that ended up being, I mean, as terrible as it was for the families and the people who got hit by it, the numbers don't pan out the way they were spreading the fear that they would.
Thank you so much, Tim. In fact, 3 years ago, a study at Oxford University pretty much came to the same conclusion that you said, which is that lack of corruption and higher degrees of governance in Nordic countries is attributed to the high levels of social capital that government has with regard to people. So I think it's a very fair point. Nishith, there are a number of questions coming in, so I'm going to quickly ask you a question about, there's a question about considering high population of India. How do you deal with the gaps between the have and the have-nots, and to what extent the relationship between AI and virtual world will, let's say, empower common people?
Yeah, I think a very good question. And of course, first of all, thank you, Tim, for giving a very provocative dialogue, and it's very interesting. I think there are two parts to it. My fundamental belief is that technology is the greatest social leveler. So even if you're a small person, but you're technologically enabled, okay, you can do wonders. But you may have a lot of money, a lot of power, but if you do not have technology, then you may drop down. Okay, so technology can enable a person to be equal to anybody else. I think the way in which I look at the world is that there are three fundamental things which everyone must be provided: food, shelter, and clothes. I think, those are three basic necessities to whatever extent, according to the climate, according to the, environment, you have it. And then rest should be open play, where efficiency and other kind of factors can allow you to do what you want to do. I'm not suggesting money is the only thing in life, but somebody may want to just go on Himalayas. He's more happy than anybody else having $1 billion. Somebody wants to make $1 billion, but so long as he does not harm, that old thing which used to say, do no harm. Now it has come to do good. So if you have $1 billion, it is not that you have $1 billion, you are bad or good, but what do you do with that money? I think using that money for the good of the everybody, and that different ways of doing things. But so long as you do not harm and do something good, do not create undue conflict, because the most important argument that is coming up, when too much wealth is concentrated in the hands of few, the fear is that they will abuse it for political purpose, and then that is a major thing. So I think if some mechanisms are found whereby that there is, as Tim also mentioned, that if people are empowered, okay, in with the internet and other technologies, you can restrict or stop the abuse of the money. And that's why we are talking about liquid democracy in some ways, where the need for money in the elections is not needed, because you spend something today, tomorrow your power can be taken back by the person if he's not happy. So you really try to win the trust rather than trying to win only the vote to control everybody. Okay. And as I said, that number of technologies today will enable people to vote across the country. In fact, there is another question I see, that more people will be able to vote if you don't have to go and stand in the queue. You can just sit from at home and do it, or wherever you are, so long as the technology ensures, number one, that you have physical and mental security. Number two, that your vote remains still anonymous. At the same time, nobody abuses the privacy part of it. Okay. And some of those mechanisms are not too difficult to put in. Okay. If we intend to put those checks and balances, then you can vote, as I mentioned in the beginning, in a minute's time. More people will vote. And if more people are, not happy, they will displace you. All that happens is that, the kind of the agency system that they have set in, as I mentioned in the current representative parliament, what has happened is that parliamentarians have become agents of the people. And agency is all about intermediation. But at the same time, technology is about disintermediation. So once you disintermediate, okay, whole world opens up. Look at Airbnb, look at Amazon, look at other platforms that have come. What does it do? What do? They actually disintermediate. So unnecessary intermediation can be eliminated. Then with the use of technology, the priorities, the people's mindset. They can contribute, they can co-create the world. So all these buzzwords which look very esoteric at one point of time, I think we have an opportunity in front of us to use these technologies for the good. And of course, we have to see the bad side of it and how that can be abused. That is where we have to concentrate, not distrusting the people, but just to be a little careful, so that, otherwise let people play free. If somebody works hard and somebody enjoys doing something, ultimate to me, I think it is very much individual, but the limit to growth has to be where happiness ends, in philosophical term. So I think that it is a lot of possibilities exist in front of us, and some of which even we do not know. Use of blockchain, use of crypto. Now, crypto is considered to be something negative at times, perceived, but it has its own plus side as well. So how do you make better use of the crypto? Because that's a new technology which will come up. So team has spoken a lot about it. I don't want to go too long into the whole thing, but if you have other question, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nishith, for that. I suppose we are going to come to the end of this program, but we have a few more questions. Tim, one of the things that we are talking about here is that to what extent, empowering citizens will actually lead to the decision-making to be more effective. In some ways, this crisis, but also crises before, because it has led to strengthening of governments, and in many ways, our private sector, our society, including technology, has come much faster than the way governments ended up reinventing themselves. So without a fundamental reimagination of government and governance, can we expect to fulfill some of these reform ideas?
Yeah, I think, if you put where we are now and where we want to be on a map, how to get there is going to be one of two different ways. One is a major global revolution, and I don't think we want that. I think the second one is an ongoing series of compromises that eventually lead us to a place where the borders don't matter anymore, where governments are like corporations and they are providing great service for the money that they take in, where a lot less is required to defend a territory, or zero to defend a territory of borders, of physical borders, and a lot more is set up to defend the infrastructure around the financial system, or assuming at that point it'll be more Bitcoin and crypto, making sure that that identity is sacred, and that kind of thinking is more relevant for the future of government. So I think that there really are two ways to get there. We're getting there. I mean, technology, you can, it's a little like whack-a-mole. If you're a politician and you don't like technology, you knock it down in one place, it pops up in another. China said Bitcoin was illegal, and Japan said Bitcoin's a national currency, and naturally all the business and all the entrepreneurs went to Japan from China based on those decisions. And so it's dangerous for a politician to say, oh, hey, this tech stuff, we don't want it, because, technology has won every war in the history of the world. Technology advances whether the industry at risk likes it or not. The media industries the record industries were trying to pound back Napster, but boy, it came back big with iTunes and Spotify. It's there, it's coming. And we have a decentralized world. We have an opportunity. We have this incredible new technology, and it's coming. And it's a matter of whether these governments are receptive of it, adapt to it, be a part of this decentralized world, or they try to isolate themselves. And by isolating themselves, they are going to be very unpopular, and all the great citizens, all the great businesses are going to leave. So that's what's going. I think really two ways to get there. And let's hope that governments start to embrace these technologies, improve themselves, and provide better service, rather than trying to push these things away and create revolution.
Thank you, Tim. I want to push you on one thing one observation you made. You said that governments are like corporations, at least they should end up becoming. Now, one of the challenges of that, framework is that corporations tend to focus on shareholders' interests almost exclusively, and that's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Although there are arguments that corporations also need to be acting in a socially responsible manner. Now, when you transfer that framework into governments around the world, there is a natural expectation on the part of a large numbers of people who simply may not have enough needs to be fulfilled through that process. So to what extent, even within that framework, governments will have to retain that responsibility of people who may not necessarily be quote unquote shareholders?
Yeah, I think that will, that's going to be interesting, because you are going to see that the governments that are focused on need will generate needy people, and the governments that are focused on opportunity are going to create wealthy societies. And I think that you're going to see a big divergence in the two. The ones that are focused on need are also going to be isolationists. They are going to create a full culture of homeless, miserable, needy people. Whereas those governments that are focused on opportunity are going to create governments or regions of people who are dynamic, builders, growers, wealth builders, employment builders, employed. They'll be employed. I think the government of the future creates 100% employment. I do know that the one thing that really drags governments and peoples and down is when people are unemployed. When they are not working, they break the law, they become depressed, crime becomes a big part of their life. They break with their families. All of these horrible things happen when people become unemployed. When people are employed and government doesn't get in the way of that employment, people are happy and healthy and driven and excited and wealthy. And that will happen as long as the governments don't get in the way. And that's regulations are what really keep people from working. People say, oh, minimum wage law should have a higher minimum wage. Every time you raise the minimum wage, that creates more unemployment. That creates more people who are not working. And that's why I'm sort of thinking, if you did a universal basic income and everybody got it, and so everybody was fed and clothed and sheltered, beyond that, everybody could work. I think that could be quite a very dynamic environment. But if you have a government that is always focused on the needy, you are going to end up with a culture of need in a very poor country. If you have a government that's focused on the best and the brightest and growing and building and trying and risking and bravery, that government is going to create incredible wealth for all its citizens, and everybody rises.
Thank you so much, Tim.
The idea of taking down the people at the top is a huge mistake. We should honor the people who have been. Jeff Bezos, we should honor that guy. Think of the amazing services that he has provided. Anyway, we should honor that guy and say, yeah, more power to him. It's great that wealth. Let's figure out how more people can get all that wealth.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that very compelling response. Nishith, there is I think we are running out of time, but Nishith, there is a question about to what extent socio-economic conditions in a country like India can address issues relating to education and health. This obviously is a big factor in any context, but during Corona and COVID-19 situation, issues relating to vulnerability of people becomes even more significant. So there is a question from Rajkumar on that, Nishith.
Yeah, I think a good question you asked me. Let me give you a very quick reaction. Okay, number one, look at how are we spending our money as a country. We spend $60 billion on defense every year. We spend $15 billion on education, and we spend $10 billion on healthcare. Now in the wars, no country wins, only companies win. Okay. And my perception would be that, can we realign our budget? Can we do something instead of spending so much money on only arms, which are 90% of them are never used? Even if you put $10 billion more in diplomacy, so you interact with different countries and create different alignments, possibly you'll achieve a lot more than spending on this technologically advanced. There'll never be an end to it. In fact, I wrote an article on autonomous weapons, so autonomous vehicles. Now, autonomous weapons are coming up. It has no heart, nothing, no soul. So once that thing comes, you'll always be behind the arms race. Wherever you go, somebody else is going to put. So in today's world, we have to think slightly differently. And I think coming back to your question, I think we have to pump more money in healthcare and in education, no doubt about it. And new models will have to be worked out. But I think in a country like us, technology is going to really drive education a lot, and people can be most empowered. And if you're healthy people, well educated, I think that means they are more intelligent, knowledgeable, and you need less number of people in the army because they will be more intelligent people and healthier people than millions of people around. So I think that's my one simple answer. And I think I can see one or two other questions also here, if I may just quickly take to them. I think, and also just remember, I think all the audience, we still have 3 or 4 sessions to go. So a lot of opportunity to discuss, talk. The whole idea of doing this 3-4 series today and Monday and then Wednesday and Thursday is, the whole idea is to see that we have enough time to explore what we are trying to do. So one question is on what will happen to concept of nation state in the new world. I believe in next 50, 70 years, we'll again go back to, I would say, a one world kind of a syndrome, because a state is a different concept than nation. Nation is a conceptual framework, language, culture, etc. State is linked to the landmass, and the concept of landmass is now slowly getting, I don't want to go into detail at this point in time. I'll be dealing with that on Monday again. But just to be quick here, is that, we have fought wars for hundreds of years to get landmass. Now today what happens, you win war, you got the territory. After that, what do? You privatize. You sell the same land to the companies, right? Who are the shareholders of the company? Are former enemies. So if you see today, simply because India has big landmass doesn't necessarily mean it's own. I think many times they are owned by the company that are by foreign people, and in the process, so it's a different syndrome today. So we should talk about it, but I think there will be disappearance of a nation state over a period of time. We'll have a different world, especially technologically driven, and immigration rules will have to be revisited. I believe next 5 to 7 years, we'll see reverse globalization. But again, we'll see the reverse impact of that also. So we'll have to, this is a road bump, I believe. So in 5-7 years, again, we'll begin to talk opening of the borders and stuff like that. Again, today I do not want to go too deep into that, but that is what I would say. If you have any more questions, I'll be happy to take.
Thank you so much, Nishith. As we come to the end of this program, I'm going to quickly ask whether Lewis or Scott or Shekhar, if any one of them have any observation or question to Tim or Nishith as we come to the end of this program. Lewis, Scott, or Shekhar?
I think one interesting point that that I would like to discuss with Tim is he talked about like nation states being the ones that can start competition. So like one nation state starts embracing one technology and then the others follow. But do you see a future in which it happens like from people bypassing nation states completely. Like instead of like a nation state taking on something new, it's like people taking on, you know, for example, like Bitcoin or stuff like that, and having this grassroots movement in which there is no nation state that empowers it. It's just people like adopting it and bypassing them.
Yeah, that I would prefer that. It does feel like there's a new generation of people who are sort of, you know, given the choice between a Bitcoin and say $10,000, they will take the Bitcoin because they believe in one world and one way of, you know, we're all a part of this one world and we're all operating with this one world. And there will be some need for a set of rules for that world, but I would be afraid of a world that only had one government or one. I like decentralized. I like competition. I like them to be forced to compete with each other. And yeah, I think there are many things that can be done without any government interference and should. And I think governments do provide some services at this point right now. Those might be broken off. It may be that a bunch of governments break off and they just be specialists in Social Security or specialists in healthcare insurance, whatever. I'm with you. I feel like we really can solve all our disputes through some sort of a decentralized system, and I'm excited about what that world's going to look like. But I do think that government provides some services, and those services should also be competitive. They should be accountable to their constituents or their customers. And so what the things, and if they're providing services that nobody wants, then shut them down. Tell them to go do something else.
Thank you so much, Tim. Shekhar and Scott, would you like to say anything?
No, I'm good. I'm still processing it. It's fascinating. Thank you very much.
Same for me.
Okay, great. Well, so I mean, I think I have a last question, and then probably we will wind up. So in some ways, I would ask this question to both Tim and Nishith. Nishith, as you look at both of you, as you look at the future, what are the things that non-governmental organizations, thought leaders, individuals, and civil society organizations can do today that can shape public opinion for the future in what we believe the possibility, or rather the baby steps towards building what is called as liquid democracy. But I would also like to say that a more stronger virtual presence of running our institutions with greater autonomy and agency for people rather than governments.
Why don't you start?
Okay, I think I just remember that the Edelman Trust Survey, and in fact it came out that most people seem to have a little more trust in the not-for-profit. Of course, they are not that everything is sacrosanct. Next is in the business, and the last, minimum trust in the government. Now, this situation we have come to, now we need to see that how can we correct the system, because everything starts with good intent, but then it derails into something else. So, and therefore we have to continuously re-engineer our thought process, re-engineer our processes and the way in which we've been functioning. So I think my take is that, we have to now start thinking about the new way of governance altogether, which we've been discussing, and I think liquid democracy is somewhat interesting because it at least attempts to combine the advantages and disadvantages or whatever you call it, and removing those ones, and give us new governance framework. There could be many other ways, but this is one thing we should explore. I think we are in the world which allows us to explore the new ways of doing things, and technology-enabled system would be less partisan and it will be more neutral. Of course, we have to also understand where to draw lines. And as I said, that you can have technologically advanced lot of things, but if your autonomous weapons coming up, and if my privacy is compromised, somebody can write a name on a bullet, and with my privacy compromised, the bullet will go and hit that individual. So you can have surgical strike on an individual. So there are some of the things that we will need to take care of, including privacy in terms of safety and security, and how do you manage those ones. And we have a lot of role to play, because ultimately we'll have to figure out what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of world we want to create. So but today is an opportune time, because we are starting on a clean slate in many ways. So, over a period of time, we have more, so to say, I would say, spiritual economy, and in many ways, happy world,
Thank you, Nishith. Thank you so much. Tim?
So I'd answer that, events like this really help. I would say go talk about it. Pick a utopian view and where we're going to get and how we're going to get there, and guide the people around you toward that view, even if it's not a popular view. In fact, I have found that the things I do the most right are the least popular when I do them. And the other thing I would do is start experimenting with some of these new technologies. Be an early adopter of Aragon. Be an early adopter of Unstoppable. Start exploring these new ways of operating and governing and thinking that may move us toward a decentralized world and an open, peaceful, loving, transparent world. I think if you want to get there, you don't blindly follow a power-mongering politician and just do whatever they tell you to do. I think you think for yourself. You don't let the media control your brain. You think for yourself. You start moving in the direction you want this world to go in, and stand by that and keep moving with it. Yeah, don't get swept up into what's popular.
Thank you so much.
One thing I will just add here, Raj, I'm sorry for interruption. Only one thing, only 30 seconds. And that is, I think, as he said, let us explore the new ideas, new ways of doing things. And there is a way, for example, we can create either a smart city or something like that. So you can start with this experiment at a smaller scale, like a laboratory, and see what comes out of it, and then improve on that and improve on that. I think then it will be, you can scale it up very fast. So initial experimentation we can start, and let's see how it can work out, because new smart cities is not about hardware, it's also about the governance. I would stop at that point of time and hope to see everybody next week on Monday for continuation of the session. And I think, Raj, you can talk about it, and our other guests are going to join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nishith.
Everyone.
On a lighter note, I will say that Nishith has created his own smart city known as Imaginarium in Aligunjan. And if you haven't already been there, I invite you to visit that place sometime. I really want to thank all of you, starting from Tim Draper and Alexander Bard and Lewis and Scott and Bradley and, of course, Shekhar, for being part of this inauguration, in many ways, kicking off event. It's been a fascinating discussion. My day job is being a president of a university and dean of a law school. And this has been a very stimulating part of my evening conversation with all of you. We have an exciting set of panels coming up. We are likely to have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a distinguished parliamentarian and an author, speaking sometime next week. We also have Mr. Nalin, who is the spokesperson of the BJP party. Both of them are likely to join in one of these discussions. As we close this session, I want to quickly say that slightly regrettably, this panel had all men. And normally we have events with a fair amount of women representation in these panels. And I'm sure this was because of the fact that such outstanding people who had to be brought in, we couldn't have an appropriate gender representation. But I must say that in the spirit of this conversation, we will have more women participating in the future panels as they become an important constituency in our effort to build democratic governance as we think about the future. With those,
you are a very popular person. I leave it to you to do the needful.
with those words, I think I'll give it to Nishith to have the last word on this. Thank you very much.
I have talked enough, and I think people are getting impatient. I know that, and so I would actually stop here. I think I'd rather have them again early next week, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I think we are going to have very exciting discussions. Very provocative. I think that's the beauty.
Send us the link. Send us the link to this talk. I'd be happy to spread it around. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tim and Lewis and Scott and Shekhar. And
everyone. Take care.